Hello, everyone. This is Thomas Pepin, NHL Talk. I'm Thomas Pepin, and let's talk about the NHL. So, today is part three of the three-part series where I'm discussing maximizing NHL draft pick value for franchises. And today we're going to discuss a GM's best uses of draft picks and what's the other stuff here? Just one sec. So we'll be taking a look at the results of the first two streams of the series, determine the best ways GMs can use draft picks, and I'm going to try to come up with some different unique ways that draft picks can be used. So that's the plan for today. Give me a brief moment to pull up the stuff from the previous streams. Draft picks. Cool. We'll put this here and this here. Okay, so I can share screen. And as always, everything's done on the spot. No prep work except for knowing the subject. I don't think in this case we're going to do gather any more data or do any more substantial calculations, at least. And where should I start here? So I have a bit clearer of a mind today than yesterday. Yesterday, man, my mind was foggy. And add on to the fact that I had to spend way more time than I wanted to in gathering the data, putting it together, doing the calculations. My brain just wasn't functioning at a high level. But today I feel a little bit more clear-minded, nonetheless still tired, so fingers crossed that I can make some sense today. So what you can see here is what was gathered yesterday on the left and the day before on the right. On the left, what I had done was gather previous trades that were done on a one-for-one basis, the draft pick in exchange for one player. I recorded the years remaining on the contract at the time of the trade. Then I got the 5-year cumulative performance of the player in the trade. We took those 5 years. Not all cases had 5 years, but for the sake of consistency, I used 5 years. Also, I think it's better to underestimate the performance due to player performance fluctuations. Also, because of what we discovered on the right side, which I'll get to, the frequency of players playing in the NHL is not so high. Also, when they make the NHL, the number of games, so just in terms of the success rate of likelihood of making the NHL, that's just if they played one game. We're not considering about, a range of performance. So if anything, you would want to underestimate the the value of the player to then match the likely value of the draft pick. Yeah, and so anyway, so that's the reason for. And then on top of it, the other thing is we looked at. So we took 10 years of draft picks, which means that half the draft picks would have only. Well, so for example, last year's draft pick would have only had two this season as an opportunity to make the NHL, whereas the 10 years ago would have had 10 years to make the NHL. And then so we took the middle point, which is 5. And I think in the end it's actually technically 5.5. So what I should do is actually correct that. But it's close enough. And again, good enough's good enough for the purposes of what we're trying to do. And so because we did 5 years for the draft picks, I also thought 5 years for the trade target or player in the trade would make sense as well. So anyways, just a bit of the rationale behind the factor, I guess you could say, that we use to calculate the player performance and value of the player in the trade. So then, yeah, like I said, over here, going back to the first stream of the series, we got all the draft picks for the past 10 years. So rounds 1 to 7, we totaled their games played, goals, assists, points, penalty minutes as well, but I mean, we never really used that. Then we took a look at the number of players that played one or more games, calculated the and then we divided it by 5 to get the approximate per year performance of those draft picks. We also did the same thing for all players, so all the data of performance, so games played, goals, assists, points, divided that by all the draft picks. So in the case of first round picks, there was 305, and then again divided it by 5 to get the per year expected performance of that round's draft pick. And finally, we had the career value, which is we divided it by the players that did play. So we could, in theory, have also done that for dividing it by the players that didn't play to get maybe a more realistic value of career value of the player. But again, I think in this case it's not really necessary. So between the two players that made the players that made the NHL and players that didn't, total players, including those that didn't make the NHL, that kind of gives you, I guess, maybe a range of expected annual performance. So that's kind of the rationale behind those calculations. And then finally, we got the best performing players for each round's, for each round. So in this case, it was Draisaitl and McDavid. Draisaitl for goals, McDavid for points. Now, where to go from here? So, give me a brief moment, and I want to consider the things we're trying to answer today. So, best ways GMs can use draft picks. So, draft picks can be used essentially in two ways. So, you can draft a player, or you can use the draft pick as an asset to trade. You could, again, something we covered, you could, in theory, but it's more or less a trade, use a draft pick as compensation for an offer sheeted player as well. So that's another way that you can use it. That's pretty infrequent, and I would say, generally speaking, if you try to do that, the only way in which you use those draft picks is if you over spend on a player, because if you spend anywhere near market value or reasonable value for a player, then in all likelihood the team's going to match. So anyways, so I would say that use of draft picks is, well, like I said, infrequent and might not be really of great consideration in terms of planning your use of draft picks. So, again, the data from yesterday, it's a small sample size in terms of estimating the market value of different draft picks. So to rely on that heavily, I would say would not be wise, but it can be used for our purposes and to approximate, the value of those draft picks. So, the first thing, I guess what we'll start with is as a question, is it better to keep your draft picks and draft them, or to trade them? And so we're going to kind of consider, we spoke about this in part yesterday, but we'll maybe discuss it in greater depth today. So one sec to share your screen again. So considering what teams get for their draft picks, so for example, we'll start with the first round pick. So Brady Ski, I think is how it's pronounced. I don't know the team that traded for him. I think it was Carolina. I believe Carolina. They got him with 4.5 years remaining. And his expected value would be 222 games played, 15 goals, 65 assists, 80 points. And then, like we were saying yesterday, if you contrast that with the career value of a first round pick, it's pretty darn close. So games is basically the same. Remember, we're considering a defenseman, so the production is going to be less. Goals 17 versus 49. I mean, again, remember, it's a defenseman. Assists is almost the same. Points shy, but remember, we're considering a defenseman. So in this case, the team that traded for Ski was they got good value compared to career. Now, one thing. How can I do this here? So what I'm thinking about doing is splitting up the players, so each draft round, into maybe quartiles based on performance. And then we know so 25% are, so the likelihood of 25% their performance is going to be X. So the bottom 25, second quartile, third, and then fourth, what you can expect. Or do we take so another thing I was considering is multiplying the likelihood of making the NHL by the average career performance, which then gives you maybe a greater or more accurate representation of the value of the player. It's another way you can consider it. I mean, there's so many different ways you can consider this. So you could think the frequency of a first round defenseman making the NHL, and also you could figure out what their average performance would be, the range of performance. I mean, there's so many different ways you can break this down. So I guess a question is, what are you trying to get out of a draft pick? Are you just trying to get a guy that makes the NHL? I would say no. You're trying to get a guy that's productive. I think that's a good way to put it. Now, what kind of production do you want out of the draft pick? So essentially, what you want at the very least out of your draft pick, or otherwise you'll trade them. So that's tough to say. I think the career average that we've already calculated is probably most accurate, because really, I mean, you want a serviceable player. Average performance is probably good enough. I think what I'm going to do here is let's just take a look at some different draft pick positions and kind of consider performance. So for example, so what we see here is annual, so per season performance approximation would be 49 games played, 10 goals, 16 assists. Oh wait, do I have this? Yeah, I have this summarized on this page, so it's probably easier to deal with this. Yeah, 49 games played, 10 goals, 16 assists, 26 points. Is that a first round? Is that first round pick valuable? That's basically half a point a game. And half a point a game. Give me a second. I'm going to bring up some other work I did previously, which I also referenced previously, that considers expected performance or target performance for each roster position. So just a sec to get that. Okay, so we want forwards. So in reality, the reason why I'm going directly to forwards is if you're drafting a player, although you can pick defensemen, goalies, forwards, really what you're trying to look for is a high-end offensive producing player, really. For GMs to say that they're trying to pick up, a defensive defenseman, I mean, really, that's not what in an ideal world, you would be constantly getting first-line centermen or maybe high-end producing wingers or something like that. Really, that's what you're trying to get. But anyways, so a first-round pick produces approximately the same as your ninth best forward. Or what, again, you'd have to go back to this stream to figure out how I got these numbers, but but to briefly kind of summarize, I made tiers of players, which essentially would be the number of roster spots. So the top tier would be your first best player. Number 2 would be your second best player, and this is positionally, so forwards. Doesn't really consider center or winger. And what we did is the first tier, to figure out the minimum expected performance, we targeted a fewer amount than the number of teams. So what you could do is you could take the 32 teams now, 32 best producing forwards, and make that as the number one player. But what I did is I filtered down to half of those, which approximates the being good enough to make the playoffs, and then from there I did groups of 32 for each tier from there. And so then that way your targets of performance approximates what you would want in order to be a playoff team, which is essentially what every team wants, is to be at minimum a playoff team. So anyways, that kind of summarizes that. So this first round pick, the annual expected performance is approximately your so one of your third line players. So really a first round pick is not on average all that valuable of a player. But what you could argue is there's essentially an 88.5% likelihood that they'll make the NHL, which is quite high. And that likelihood will likely produce a third line player. So to have a third line player more or less guaranteed out of a first round pick I would say that's quite valuable. Now, again, it's plus or minus that kind of performance. So, could be a second line player, could be a fourth line player, or doesn't even make the NHL. So, that's just kind of average. And um, so I would say first round picks are valuable. Do you want to keep them? Well, it's like a lottery. So every player that you or every draft pick you have is a ticket to a lottery, and the question is what kind of odds and value do you need to get in order to play the lottery? Um, one thing we so something that I noticed in like the most recent trades, the picks that they have to give up in order to get a certain level of performance is not that expensive. So if I recall correctly, it was like so the first thing that comes to mind, I think it was a fifth round pick for what's his name? I know the player, it's just the name I'm trying to think of. I think he was with Columbus. It's not Gusev. It's I gotta look it up. One sec. As soon as I see it, it's gonna annoy me that I couldn't remember. Where is he? Was it Columbus? Maybe I'm remembering wrong. Yeah, it was Columbus. Nyquist. Um, Gustav Nyquist. That's why I was thinking the other name. So, anyways, fifth round pick and salary retained by Columbus for Nyquist. And actually, I might as well share screen. Just give me a sec. And so Nyquist, 15-ish goals a year, and something around just over half a point per game. So that's decent performance. And I mean, if you want to contrast that with a draft pick, 15 goals and half a point per game is basically a first round pick in terms of performance. Now you have to factor in that. So as an example with Nyquist, he eats up some of your cap space, and so although he can produce at a certain level, his value in terms of per cap hit essentially might not be worth that first round pick. And I mean, in this case, it was a fifth round pick, and on top of it, it is a rental because he expires, and there's no rights to the player after that. So you're paying for a third of a year, more or less. And so it's a third of his expected performance. And so a third of 15 goals is 5 goals. Where is the approximate thing here? So we'll consider this. We'll use this season as a reference point. So approximately 5 goals, 11 assists, 16 points. So that is I mean, you could argue that he's worth a second round pick in a trade. So I mean, that's a massive underspend in terms of the cost in the trade to get him. And remember, the likelihood of a second round pick making the NHL is 53.4%. So, I mean, it's tough to say. I mean, really, outside of a first round pick, everything else is tradable. And I mean, realistically, you can get a lot of people on free agency. So whether or not they'll choose your team, that's another story. But so free agency, you get people for free, except for, obviously the cost of their contract. So you can gain assets that way. It doesn't have to be by drafting and developing. And really, in the end, I mean, yeah, it's like I just said. Excluding first round picks, everything else is very hit and miss. Odds of making the NHL are not that high. And if they do, their performance equally is not very high. So, yeah, so I mean, really, GMs shouldn't really care about trading away their draft picks, except for the first round. That's what I would argue. Then when it comes to the first round, it's a lottery. You don't know exactly what you're going to get, but it's basically a third line player is what you can estimate your first round picks to be worth. Now, the other thing, what I would say is to consider the expected performance across the rest of the round. So if you're going to be getting any of those other picks, what's really the difference between a second round, third round, fourth round, and so on? So let's just have a look at that. So one sec. Okay, so the difference in expected performance out of a second round pick and a third round pick is essentially nothing. It's negligible. The likelihood of them making the NHL increases by 36.17%, which is this column here. But so it's more certain the performance you're going to get, since the averages are more or less the same. It's just more certainty of that performance, essentially. So, but I mean, the performance it's not that much, and it's essentially the same, like I said. So, and then you go third round to fourth round, or between second round and fourth round. The expected performance, again, the same. It's like not much different. Second round and a fifth round, the same, more or less. Sixth round, the same. Seventh round, the same. So really, second all the way down to seventh, it's basically the same. It's just the likelihood of them making the NHL continues to decrease. So Yeah, so that's kind of interesting. So if they're all the same value, hmm. If they're all the same value, then what you really want is more of them. So more chances to hit the lottery, essentially. Let's kind of consider that. So that was something I had as a plan to begin with. One of my ideas of how to maximize the value of draft picks. So okay, so let's consider here a second round pick could be, so basically what if all the performance is essentially the same, a second round pick is equal in value to a third and a seventh. So 39.22 plus 15 is 54%. Oops. And a round two is more or less 54%. So a third and a seventh is equal to a 2 in value. And I would rather 2 chances than 1. Or would I? Would I want 2 chances? See, because the second round pick is more likely. So, anyways, I think maybe a better way to put this is as soon as your likelihood of the picks that you're getting is greater than the likelihood of the pick you're giving up, then you should do the trade. So, for example, let's say you can get a third and a fourth for a second. That means that you're getting approximately 70% chance that you have a player that makes the NHL versus the 53%. And then that performance of the player is basically the same. So a third and a fourth for a second, no brainer, do it as far as I'm concerned. And so I really think keeping that as a requirement, so the combined percentage likelihood should be greater than what you're giving up. If that's the case, then the more the better. So really, I mean, 3/4 for a second, that would be a lot better. So you have 30%, 30.72 times 3, 91-ish percent likelihood of having an NHLer versus the 53, and the performance is expected to be about the same. So I would do that every day. And really, so I think once it comes down to picks after the first round, it's a numbers game. You just want more lottery tickets because although when you're playing the lottery, your odds are extremely slim, each time you get another lottery ticket, your odds, I think they essentially multiply by, what is it? It's you double your likelihood of winning the lottery. Now, again, so for example, an actual lottery, your odds are so extremely slim. So if you have two lottery tickets, each one has odds of 1 in 1,000,000. Then you buy two of them, you have 1 in 500,000 odds, which is, I mean, better, but still extremely slim. And then once you buy enough lottery tickets to get close to winning the lottery, then basically you've spent more than what you're actually going to get. So, anyways, so just the more attempts you have at it, and if you're not spending so much to get those attempts, I would say that that's probably better. Now, you have to also manage, because there's a requirement for NHL rosters of number of players that they can have under contract. What is the amount? Doo, doo, doo. Yeah, so maximum number of contracts permitted. So active rosters 23, we already know that, or generally speaking, we should. Total NHL contracts per team 50. And then total players belonging to a team is 90. So the one thing about having draft picks is if you keep drafting all these players, you're going to run up to the limit of number of people controlled by your franchise. The reason I knew this is because of playing the NHL video game, where I would do things like this, draft a whole bunch of players, and then realize that I couldn't own all those players. Well, no, sorry, I wouldn't draft all the players. I'd acquire a whole bunch of players with good potential, and then whichever ones would perform well, I would keep them, and the other ones I would trade them. So, and then I would keep having trouble because I would just have so many players, and I'd have to move all these players and find space. But anyways, taught me about this concept about the number of players that a team can have ownership of. So anyways, getting back to what I was saying there is if you have a whole bunch of draft picks and you're drafting a bunch of players, then a problem you're going to run into is just having too many players under ownership, which isn't a bad thing because you can trade them. So, but in the end, you're not going to necessarily sign any of them, and you can just release them to free agency. There's a whole bunch of different ways you can resolve that, but it's just something to keep in mind anyways. So, like I said, I think the big thing here with anything second round or lower is just it's a numbers game. Get as many picks as you can, and then that way you have a bunch of different kicks out the can to, so to speak, get players. Now, just for interest's sake, what I'm going to do is let's take a look at some players that you can get at different draft positions. So second round, point per game players are, there's one in the past 10 years. Everything else is shy of it. Well, there's another one, but that's because he's more recent. That's why it didn't pop up earlier. 2 point per game players in the past 10 years out of the second round. So that's 2 out of 309 players. So the likelihood of you getting essentially what you want, which is a point per game player, you've got a 2 in 309 chance on a second round pick. That is quite low. There's some other things to consider, like defenseman Severson's a third of a point per game. Montour, half a point per game. Dunn, approximately half a point per game, and so on. So in that case, maybe save your later picks for, so any pick other than a first, maybe aim for goalies and defensemen, maybe. Because as a concept, they're going to produce less, and it's better to get a good player for their position than it is to get a low-performing player that would be a forward, if that makes sense. And sorry, there's another one in here that's almost a point per game. I wrote by hints. So, geez, and it's not going to get any better for if we start to consider. Oh, did I get that correct? I'll undo it anyways, just in case I screwed something up. Let's see here for third round picks. We want points, descending. Two point per game guys in third round picks. Almost 3, and Adam Fox is a defenseman on top of it. So, and again, it's a 3 in 306 chance that you're going to get a point per game player out of a draft pick, and it's like, geez, it's not so good. So it's almost like, why even own draft picks? Feels like it's not even worth it. Why would you even want the draft picks? It's a good question. Why even want the draft picks? Costs your organization a lot to develop them, just from a financial standpoint, not considering, cap implications or whatever. From a business standpoint, it costs you a lot to develop draft picks. they're completely uncertain of what they're going to be. You can pick people up in free agency. They are certain. They'll be more expensive, but very quickly, uh, these draft picks are going to fetch the same money as um, established players. So the only real reason you would want to have draft picks is if you're good at targeting players. So if your success rate is greater than average, and preferably you'd want it to be substantially better than normal. Um, and that, but preferably both, you're good at developing players. So either that you're good at selecting them, you're good at developing them, or both, and preferably both. So let's just see it. For example, players, the teams that are drafting them. So on the high end of points, we've got, let's see who stands out. So we've got Rangers twice. Tampa's twice. Whoops. Pittsburgh, but we're getting pretty low here. So, I mean, it seems like, at least, well, from third rounds, there's nobody really much better than anybody else at drafting. So, let's see for fourth round picks. We want points, descending. So let's see here. Tampa again showing up multiple times towards the top. That's about it. Nobody else. Let's have a look at fifth round picks. Whoops. So fifth round picks. New Jersey maybe. And I mean, that's about it. So, I mean, already, I could go through the rest of them, but already you can tell no team is really all that much better than the rest in terms of selecting. So, okay, so if teams can't select well, which is what we're seeing here, they could, in theory, develop well. But this would also indicate that the development's not that good either, because otherwise there'd be more players showing up for each team. So it looks like teams are not good at selecting. They're not good at developing. So draft picks are not of much value except for the first round picks. And then in which case, I mean, let's just see out of interest how good these, if there's anybody that shows up more than others for selecting the first round picks. So Edmonton, Colorado, Toronto shows up a few times. Calgary, a couple. Buffalo, a couple. Winnipeg, a few, kind of in the middle here. And remember, this is all the best players, though, so they're all at the top. I mean, at least they're all equally as good. So where do we get to like half a point per game? So somewhere around here. So really, that's like 28 players are greater than a point per game. This is just an approximation because I'm not going through all of them, and some play more games than others than because they've been around longer, they were drafted earlier, and so on. Anyways, we're just kind of approximate numbers here. So 30 players in the past 10 years are like half a point per game or more. Of the first round picks. I mean, again, that's not perfectly accurate, and it's probably I'm completely understating it, but yeah, I mean, so really, there's nobody selecting more accurately than the rest. So, yeah, I mean, so really, first round picks you can justify just because the potential, and in all likelihood, you're going to get a guy that's going to play in the NHL. So, first round picks, you should hold on to them. Nobody's really all that better than the rest at selecting, so everybody's kind of just taking a lottery ticket and hoping that it pans out. And so, yeah, so first round picks, keep them. The rest, what's the point? I wouldn't be able to justify it because, like I said, you've got all these different people in free agency. There's always somebody available. So there's some people that don't get signed. So Alex Chason is one of the guys that I've referenced on a number of occasions where, in my opinion, although, I'm not analyzing his actual on-ice performance, but strictly from a stats standpoint, he should have been playing in the NHL this year, and he never had a team choose him. And I see so many of those players that could probably play in the NHL that don't get signed. And meanwhile, you're putting these prospects in that in all likelihood are not going to play or not going to make the NHL. So what's the point in even having them? So trade them to people. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, let the cupboards go bare of draft picks, and don't bother with it. And this kind of goes in tandem with what I just did with the management strategy that I developed there. Because what I say is, so what I guess maybe I'll correct myself here. So what I said is you'd preferably want players on two-way contracts, which would be not on two-way contracts, entry-level contracts, because they can go up and down easier. So in that regard, those are all your first round picks is what you'd want. So all your first round picks are going to be on entry level contracts. You can send them up and down, no risk of losing them. And those are your depth players. And you want kind of, what was it? Approximately 2 lines worth of those. So that's, for forwards, that would be 6. Defense, that's 4. So that's 10. And you keep their ability to go up and down without being claimed. I think it was, if I recall correctly, something like 5 years. So you always will have approximately 5. So if you draft your first round pick every year, assuming they turn out being approximately average, you'll have 5 of those every year that you can send up and down. You don't get the full allocation that I was recommending in terms of depth of what you want to be a competitive team. So you might have to rely on two-way contracts for the remainder of those. But big deal. I mean, if you lose those players to other people claiming them, I mean, you can only do what you can do. And in reality, you just hope that you stay healthy, and in all likelihood, you won't have to go 2 lines deep into the AHL to pull up players. So really, I mean, it's not all that risky, and you can do. So 5 is probably good enough, anyways. Yeah, and on top of it, you have the entry-level slides and things like that you can take advantage of. There's a number of different things that you can do to still make that strategy work. But essentially all you're doing that with is first-round picks. And I'd say trade away the rest. Who cares about the rest of the picks? Don't even use them. Don't even try to do the picks, because in all likelihood you're going to miss. And it's just not worth it. All of them. Because what did we have for first round picks again? Their expected performance is, like I said, something like a third line player. And I mean, in the end, if you just go based on that, you're going to have 5 approximately third line players that can come up and down, which is really the type of people that are going to be coming up and down anyway. So yeah, your first round picks, those are useful. Keep them. They're going to be used in exactly the way that they, exactly the value that they have. And really, in terms of trades, we don't have a good sample size to compare it to, but what you would get in return for a first round pick, it's better to have that lottery ticket than it is to trade the first round pick for an equivalent performing player, because the lottery ticket could be, not a McDavid because he was a first overall, but like one of those middle to bottom first round picks that turn out playing, like who's the guy that was picked late and turned out good? Pasternak or Teravainen, maybe Hurdle, Barzal, 16th pick. So I mean, I'd rather have that lottery ticket to keep. So just never get rid of your first round picks. It just It just doesn't make sense. And beyond that, I mean, it's like I said, if you're going to keep your picks, maybe you would want to have just more lottery tickets. So maybe 5 5th-round picks is better than having a second-round pick. That's what I would argue. So more is better when it comes to anything past the first round. But like we saw, nobody really is all that much better than the rest at drafting or developing, it looks like. So just don't even use the picks. Get what you can with the picks. I mean, I don't really know how else to put it. That or from a organizational standpoint, so from ownership, really, really spend and target heavily for drafting, developing, or both. That's the only other thing I could say. And if you don't do that, if you're just doing like everybody else, there's no point in having those lower draft picks. Trade them away for whatever people are willing to give you. That's what I say. And I mean, I think really in the end that summarizes everything. There's not really much more to say. And the fact that, teams are getting approximately the value of draft picks in the trades they make. I mean, then what's the point of having those draft picks? Just trade them away for people that will give you an asset that you want or need. So I guess the best way to summarize this, and really I don't really need to share screen anymore because this is pretty much it. So my strategy as a GM would be free agency all day. Sign who you can. Make up your roster with that. Do your first round draft picks. So free agency first round draft picks. And then use your draft picks to trade for players that you want if anybody will take your draft picks. And then if you have to keep your draft picks, so if everybody did this, nobody would be trading their draft picks, they'd be keeping them, then the better option of the two would be to trade for more draft picks. So let's say everybody has to keep their draft picks because nobody's trading. Well, then in that case, I would want to trade my second round pick for as many other picks as I can get. And then that, like I said, that just gives you more lottery tickets to try to pick up a good player. Put them into your system, hope for the best, but expect the worst, and just keep trying to get free agents. And otherwise, I mean, the other way, obviously, you can compose your roster is through trades. So you have people, you trade 1 for 2, or you trade 2 for 1, or whatever, however you need to do that to make up your team, depending on what you can or can't get through free agency or draft. I think that best summarizes the whole thing. So to maximize your draft picks is to trade them for as good of value as you can get. If people still value draft picks, then take advantage of that valuation of those draft picks and get something for them. That's what I'd say. And then otherwise, since you're not getting draft picks, well, the argument is well, your team's going to not have any players. Well, just pick up, East Coast Hockey League players and try to develop them. Pick up AHL players, try to develop them. It's the same as a draft pick. Pick up other people's players that they don't want, or trade your draft picks for those players that your pro scouts target. So what I would do then is, for example, you could trade a 7th round pick for an East Coast Hockey League player that's a point per game that in theory maybe could move up to the AHL and then move up to the NHL. That's what I would do with my draft picks. It makes way more sense because you have certainty of performance, and it's just a question of ceiling, really. And you just keep pushing to see what their ceiling is. So I think those are kind of all the different ways that I would treat my draft picks. Maybe there's other ways I'm not thinking of. But that's what I mean, those are the different options, the different ideas I can think of on the spot. As always, because this is on the spot. Yeah. Those are my thoughts. I think, and I mean, because like I said, none of this stuff I necessarily have an answer to before the start of the stream, but I think those are a lot of really good points. And I mean, as concepts, I like the thoughts of it. Never draft a player. It just doesn't make sense. Use them as assets to get something. And if you have to draft, just have a whole bunch of bottom round picks if you can, because it's all the same. Doesn't matter. So anyways, I think we'll end it there. That's all really I have to say, but I think there's a lot of really good points there, in my opinion. But anyways, so if you agree, hit the like button, share with your friends, subscribe, turn on notifications. Otherwise, channel homepage has upcoming streams, should be 2 p.m. Eastern daily, except for Sundays. There's been some modifications here to the schedule because trade deadline days coming up, and there's a whole bunch of different moves, and I'm doing a number of YouTube shorts, so then I just want to space things out appropriately, and so that'll change my start time for the stream. So tomorrow, in all likelihood, again, it's going to be 2 p.m. or 2:15 p.m. Eastern for tomorrow. And in any case, it'll say on the channel homepage upcoming streams if I make any changes to the timing. Again, as a reminder, on trade deadline day, so this Friday, March 3rd, we're going to be starting a stream at 11 a.m. Eastern, going straight to the deadline and past it for me to talk about anything that comes in at the last moment. So it's going to be a long form stream. I'm going to talk about a whole bunch of different subjects. You can have a look at the scheduled stream to see all the different topics I'm going to talk about. And it's going to be those and more. So if you don't have TSN or an equivalent sports channel, you can tune in to me. I'll be watching all the stuff and keeping you up to date as if you're watching it live. So So yeah, please tune in to my live stream on trade deadline day this Friday, and yeah, you'll get everything that you'd get on one of those channels that you'd be paying for, and hopefully more. And I think I'll have a lot of interesting things to talk about. So yeah, and then lastly, if you have any comments, leave them in the comments. Suggestions, same thing. And once again, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you tomorrow. Don't know the subject tomorrow. Have absolutely no idea, is the honest truth. But I'll figure it out before the start of the stream tomorrow. So anyway, see you guys tomorrow.